All right, today is August 1st, and I want to welcome you to Free Hands Friday, number 23, with Greg Howard and our guest host. Our host is Jim Meyer. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Jim, it's all yours.
Hi, everybody. Hey, how's it going? I just wanted, for those that don't know, just do a quick little background on Greg, just to introduce him. I'm sure everybody that's logged on here knows. And I thought one way to go would be just to hit a few of the facets of Greg, because as we know, he's a pretty diverse guy. I think a lot of us first know Greg as a recording artist. So if I'm not mistaken, next year marks 30 years of stick playing for Greg, so that's a pretty big milestone. A lot of people are familiar with stick figures, which is a landmark, though you may be familiar with the remastered version of it. But solo stick, Greg's done duos. The Handiwork video is a duo with stick and drums. The Azul is a trio. Greg's worked with a four-piece band, which is a little tricky for some stick players, but to actually have a band with a bass player and a Chapman stick, but Greg managed to pull that off. We got your Latin fusion-y stuff and some beat poetry related things. And what some of us are really amazed by is the improvisation side of Greg. So Water on the Moon, Ether Ore, and certainly the new Azul. So as a recording artist, Greg's pretty well known. As a performer, Greg's played across North America, all across Europe. He's known in Japan for sure. A couple of key things that I really stood out when I was looking at Greg's bio is the Montreal Jazz Festival, a pretty hard gig to get. Greg's played there. Greg's also played at the Lincoln Center Summer Festival in New York City. Yeah. And then many of us also know Greg as an instructor, and I believe we're coming up within the next year or so of 20 years of Greg being involved in stick seminars all over the place, that sort of thing. Many of us, you know, there's Emmett's book, and then there's the stick book that we start to learn from. And for anybody that's got that, you really need to have the companion CD that goes with that. Greg's also got the instructional DVD, so quite a bit going on. And one thing that I find really unique, it's so nice to have a Chapman stick songbook. To be able to, you know, get a little bit more familiar with stick tap, but just to learn a stick player's song from printed music. So Greg is just all over the place with a lot of things, and my first question for Greg was going to be, why are you trying to make us all look so bad? But I think instead of that, I might just say, in talking to Greg recently, you mentioned the word stickness, and I wanted to start off with that because my interpretation, I may be wrong, is that what you mean by that is physical things about the stick and sonic aspects about the stick and the things that are uniquely related to the stick. Many of us come to the instrument trying to shoehorn it into, oh, it's a guitar and a bass, or it's a piano, or some such thing. But that'll be my first question for you, Greg. Talk to us a little bit about what you mean about stickness, and really anything else you want to talk about. So take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jim. First off, thanks so much to Russell and Gene for getting this together, and to you, Jim, for hosting the event. I'm really, really happy to be doing this. I think this whole series of Free Hands Fridays is just fantastic. I've tried to watch as many of them as I can. I've not been able to join very many of them. This Friday afternoon is just a busy time for me, but they're all such an incredibly diverse group of people, and the music that everybody's bringing to it is so different too. And I think when I talk about stickness, one of the things that I like to think about is how it is a really nice lens or window, if you will, onto each of the players' own creativity. Like, even though we learn certain ways of doing things, certain kinds of techniques, everybody expresses themselves so perfectly and so individualistically through this instrument that that's one of the things I really love about it. And I think the reason for that, where that comes from, is just that intimate connection that we get when we touch the strings and our hands are right there on the vibrating strings. You know, the hand that made that note sound is still there, manipulating that note. So any interaction with that is really instantaneous. And I came from the keyboard, and so I was always frustrated by the lack of direct connection to the sound. You know, you've got a key, and then you've got the mechanism inside, and then if it's a piano, it's coming out from a soundboard. If it's a synthesizer, it's got to go through an amp and come out of a speaker. Just so much more removed. Whereas even with the stick, though it's amplified, you still feel that vibration underneath your fingers all the time. It's always there, right? And so even though it may not be very loud, next time you put your stick on, I would say just play a note and pay attention to what you're feeling in your finger when you play that note. That vibration is there. And you feel that vibration in your hands and in your arms, and if the instrument's leaning back towards your shoulder, it's there too. It's very subtle, but it's right there, and you're connected to it. And that is, I think, the biggest thing about what I mean by stickness, is this instantaneous connection between us and the music that we're making, where the sound is coming out. I don't think there's really another instrument like that. Even the guitar, if you think about the guitar, okay, if you pluck a string, geez, good demo. I pluck that string, the finger that played that note is not the one that's holding that note, right? That's my other hand back here, right? So to me, that's a big difference, that there's this kind of duality of purpose between the hands on the guitar, or even the violin, where your bowing hand doesn't even touch the string, unless your pizzicato it does. But the thing is that there's still this kind of mechanism there, even though you're connected to it. And with the stick, I hit that note, I'm holding it, I'm touching it, and when I let go, it stops. So that's just about as close to the vibration as you can possibly get and be playing an instrument. So that's what I would say the first element of it is, definitely. And then going on from there, I don't know if you guys do anything with digital audio workstations, where you're recording things and you can look at the waveform on your computer. Next time you get a chance to do that, try this little thing where you pluck a string and look what that waveform looks like, and then take that same note and tap that note and see what the waveform looks like. So with the plucked waveform, it looks like this. It blooms out, okay? And with the tapped waveform, it goes ba, and it's like a drum hit followed by a sustained tone, okay? So that's really unique in musical instruments as well. I don't think there are any other instruments that kind of generate that sound in that way. So the stick's sound is really distinctive because of that. When you hear somebody playing the stick, it's pretty easy to tell, oh, that's a stick. I can hear that sound. I can hear the sound of the string hits, the note rings, as opposed to, that's a very different kind of a sound compared to that really pronounced attack is the other element of it. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the vibration aspect of stickness that I think is really unique and really interesting. And there are other aspects which we can talk about later, but I don't want to make a speech here, so I'd much rather just maybe play a little bit, kind of let you soak up a little bit of music, and then we'll go on from there. This is probably the latest thing that I've written, or one of the latest things I've written. It's kind of a blues groove, and I think I'm going to call it Blues for Six Fingers, and you'll know why that is in just a minute.
everybody's muted, but they're clapping. So.
I hear you. Thank you, guys.
That has a title, Greg? Or not yet?
I was thinking like Blues for Six Fingers.
Okay, but it sounds like it's up in the air.
Up in the air, absolutely. And this is a little groove that I just came up with. Every now and then Azul does these gigs that are like almost 3 hours long. And to be honest with you, trying to improvise solid for 3 hours, even with a really long break in between the sets, is really hard. It just wears you out. So it's nice to have a couple of grooves that you can come back to. And we play Stillwater, and we play All Blues sometimes, a Miles Davis tune. And there's this great tune by Bob Moses, written on the chord changes of Autumn Leaves, called Autumn Leaves, named after Dave Liebman. It's a really cool reinterpretation of Autumn Leaves, and we do that sometimes too. But for the most part, we are improvising, but nice to have those little grooves to throw in.
All right, since you said the magic word improvising, that was one of the things I wanted to get you to talk a bit more about. And I guess one thing I'm curious about is improvisation the beginning of your composition technique? I mean, is that where you start? Or is it like you write some pieces that you want to be structured, and then you're in a different frame of mind when you want to do an improv piece?
I think that spontaneous composition is the way I like to describe improvisation. So for me, it's a much more natural feeling process in a way than actually sitting down and trying to write music. Like if I say to myself, I'm going to sit down and write some music, I'm never going to write any music. It's just not going to happen. So I have to come up with these things while I'm playing. So that little groove just came up one day when I was just messing around, and that's usually the way things happen for me. With the stick, sometimes I'll come up with a chord progression, and then I'll try to start improvising a melody over it, and that's the way I might write a tune. Or even writing a tune outside of the stick itself, just have like a little melody in my head, and then do my best to remember it, and then bring it to the stick and find a way to harmonize it and put it together. But there are definitely tunes that are stick tunes that were written through the stick, and tunes that are more neutral, that don't come through the stick that way, that are just out there. So a lot of tunes on Lift, for example, are tunes I wrote. A couple of them are tunes I wrote even before I played the stick. So there's different ways to bring your compositions to the instrument.
And do you ever do the technique of just recording your spontaneous sessions and then going back and listening like, oh, I like that, or is that?
Not very much in terms of pulling tunes out. I think that I probably should do that, but if it's really good, then I'll just go ahead and release the recording, and it becomes one of my new improv albums. Yeah, every now and then there are little gems in there, and they can stay in your head and percolate with you. I mean, I've got some tunes that I've started writing probably 20 to 30 years ago that I've never finished writing, that sometimes I'll be walking down the street or out in my garden, and that tune will just come back in my head, and I'll be singing it, and it'll be there. It's still there. It's just not quite ready to be born just yet. So I have a very active auditation life. I don't really listen to music outside of what's going on in my own head.
Prior to the stick, as far as I know, you played keyboards and saxophone, right?
Yeah, keyboards and saxophone, yeah.
And is that still a part of your thinking or composition or whatever? Do you think like a sax player still, or is the stick really?
Nah. I don't think I do. I think that the stick is really so much of a focus of what I'm doing that it's really completely, about the stick. I made a decision right before I started recording stick figures to do that. I was just kind of really mediocre on the stick, the keyboards, and the saxophone. And I knew I had a lot of electronic effects that I like to mess around with. I knew that there was no way that I was going to get to be really good on any of them until I decided I got to pick one. And, I knew personally some really good saxophone players, and I knew I was probably never going to get to be as good as them. And the same thing was true of the keyboards. So I didn't know any stick players, and I didn't really know of any stick players except for Tony, really, at the time. And so I just said...
You're talking like mid-'80s at this point, right?
Well, late 80s, early 90s, and I just decided that the stick would be a good choice, but partly because it was unique, and nobody really knew whether you were any good on it or not. but partly just because I really loved it. It really spoke to me in a way that the other instruments did.
Okay, you did say one of the magic words. Gear tends to be a topic at all the seminars and these sort of online things as well. But instead of getting into specifics of I use this overdrive pedal or this EQ or whatever, what are your thoughts about just the purpose of using effects especially when you're playing the stick?
Well, the stick is this incredible palette, or actually, no, the stick is an input device. Okay, it's a huge input device, and you think about what it's capable of. Its range, all the way here from this low C up to this D, and the tuning, it's the classic tuning. Divided up into two string sets that overlap each other, so you've got really interesting possibilities of creating, overlapping sides that kind of emphasize the duality of the instrument, or you can put the two hands together to make it all one big sound. There's all kinds of ways that you can think of the two sets of strings, and that's even before you start using effects. And to me, the effects give you colors. I like to think of them as a painter would think of colors. So Water on the Moon is a great example because every section of that record, every portion of that piece, it's basically a piece of music. It's not just random. There's a development to it, and it has a way of progressing from one section to the next. And each section is introduced by introducing a new effect platform, basically. If you go back and listen to it that way, with that in mind, you'll hear, okay, yeah, this part is happening because Greg is choosing this particular sound, and it's creating this kind of ambiance or this kind of relationship between the two sides. Just to give you an illustration of that, I like to use effects that have these kind of expanding envelopes on them, what they call a slow gear on the Boss stuff. It's an envelope follower as well. So when I hit a chord, you don't hear any attack. You just hear the swelling up of the note underneath. And you can do this with a volume pedal too, but if I don't want to mess around with the volume pedal, I'll have that kind of a sound there. And I love the way that gives my right hand this very distinctive texture. When I'm playing something on my left hand, in addition to that, it's so clear what's going on in my left hand because I'm not using any kind of an articulative sound in the right hand. It doesn't interfere with all of that that's going on. And that really brings me to another element of the stickness that I mentioned earlier, which is this idea that the drum is present in the sound of the stick. If you think about what you do as a player, and you think about all the sound that you're making, that sound, with its very strong attack, it's very long sustain. The stick has a really, really nice natural decay to it, very long and ringing out. I'm not even adding any vibrato or any compression or anything to the sound. That sound, that's ta-da, 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 ta-da on the drum, built in with the sound of the bass or the guitar that would be doing the same thing. It's like they're unified in this really tight way. So when you're playing, you want to be careful not to have too much going on because it can tend to be a little bit cluttered. If you work with a drummer who's doing a lot less, that gives you the opportunity to be a lot more powerful rhythmically because you're not going to interfere with each other. Just a little digression there. Yeah?
Just a little trivia question for you that maybe you would know the answer to, but back when Emmett was playing the Freedom guitar and even the early days when he was building his own guitars, do you know at what point he started using the split pickup to make sure that the bass could stay separate from the right hand? Does that go way back?
I think that goes back before the stick because I think that what he had done was he had taken the guitar tuning and I think he had an 8-string guitar was the first time he did this, and he took the bottom 3 strings of the guitar, E, A, D, and he swapped them over in terms of pitch, but he kept their ascending pitch relationship. So the E became a low D, the A stayed the same in the middle, and the D became an E. So what he was able to do is extend the range of the stick by a whole tone. And I think at that point he had set up a split pickup so that he was able to have kind of these lower notes of these chords with a different sound. I could be wrong about that, though. I mean, you should ask Emmett about it. But maybe that's just what I'm remembering based on what he's told me about.
I know as the person that's the focus here, it's impossible for you to read what's all the text that's going down the right side of the screen. But let me summarize a little bit of it. Somebody's asking about Randy Clare up in Seattle is asking about the three-finger approach, and this is maybe a personal thing, but you want to maybe give us a minute or two about your right hand and why you play that way.
Really quickly, first off, I'd just like to say there are amazing stick players who play with 4 fingers on their right hand. Okay, so Bob and Steve are the 2 primary ones. I think Don Schiff as well. It's not to say that there's one right way or wrong way to play the stick, but when I read through Freehands, Emmett's book, he gets to a point in the book. He says, well, here you kind of got to make a choice. You've got to choose 3 fingers or 4 fingers. 3 fingers tends to be faster when you're playing diatonically through these fourths. And that made a lot of sense to me, even though I was a keyboard player and I was going to lose, in addition to not having my thumb to use that much anymore, I was going to lose my pinky too. And the reason why I like 3 fingers is that it makes it possible for me to move my hand around the board a lot more than if I was using 4 fingers. And I like that energy, that feeling of freedom of moving the hand around the board. So if you look just briefly, let's say I'm going to play an F Mixolydian scale, for example. So I'm going to go F. And you can see the way I'm playing the scale. I'm not keeping my fingers spread out like this. I'm letting my hand kind of float over the board. And that movement gives me the ability to articulate the notes in the same way, whether I'm going up a string or down a string. Okay? So I wouldn't want to show you an example of how that would work 4-fingered because I'm not practiced at that. It would make it look worse than it can actually be. But a 4-fingered player would probably play this scale. I guess they would play it like 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, like that. Okay? So you think, well, what's wrong with that, Greg? It's kind of the same thing. But I find it easier to get the pinky into the equation if the instrument is down more like this. Okay? And I don't like to play with the board that low because I don't like what it does to my left hand. So I like to keep the board way up here like this. And when I try to involve the pinky, it's going to be for things like playing unison bends, like that. Or if I want to play harmonics, I have my pinky free to do that. But mainly it's just a question of how I like to feel moving around. So I can play... And I've developed this way of understanding the key of the fretboard as a series of overlapping zones. So I have my 3rd finger scale, then I have my 2nd finger scale, and my 1st finger scale. And that same pitches, all played by those 3 different fingerings, that gives me the ability to play any melody anywhere I want on the board without having to learn a new series of fingerings. I already know how each one of those zones is going to work. So it just makes it really easy for me to transition from one place to the next, to get to those spots where I can harmonize the way I want to harmonize or pull off the way I want to pull off. All of those things, I find, come very naturally through this 3-fingered approach. You may very easily be able to do them all with the 4-fingered approach. I just don't play that way, so I don't know how to explain that to anybody.
I was actually thinking about you. One of my students up here, Rita, who you would have met at this seminar a year ago, is a classically trained pianist, and she's really coming along with the stick, by the way. And she just automatically uses her pinky in her right hand, and we were discussing this in the last lesson that probably because she's a piano player, and her pinky just automatically gets in there. So as a teacher, I'm wondering, like, do you watch a student and see if you get a sense of what they're naturally going to do, or do you try to maybe steer them in one direction or the other?
I have some students who use 4-fingered technique, and I really do my best to try to take what I'm doing and apply it to what their understanding of the board is. But without getting too bogged down into something that people might not relate to, I just want to make a connection between the piano and the stick in terms of how you could explain this to someone who was a piano player who was coming to the stick. And that would be like this. When you're playing the scale on the piano, you play thumb, index, middle, then you cross the thumb underneath, and then you continue the pattern up that way, right? So that's how they move, right? Am I right about that? It's been a long time since I took a piano lesson.
For sure, because that's how you fingers as you use three of them. Yeah.
Exactly. So you go. So the thing about the stick is that if you think about the break between the strings, there's 3 notes per string in a diatonic harmony that we are most familiar with. And so if I think about that change, now I'm going to make that change. It would be as if I was sliding my thumb underneath to play the next group of keys. Same idea, except that I'm doing it on strings instead. So or it's a major regular major scale there. But the other thing I like about this, which is to me it's really awesome, is that no matter what key I'm playing, the physical reflexes are the same. So if I go from that F Mixolydian to F Dorian, for example, I've still got the same 3 fingers involved. It just changes where they're playing the notes. So if I'm on this position of the board, it's not going to matter what key I'm playing. My mechanism for moving up through the scale from string to string is going to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. And on it goes. That never changes. And that to me is nice because it means I don't have to make decisions about what finger I'm going to use depending on what key I'm in.
Okay. Yeah. Well, since we've taken a little bit of an instructional direction here, I guess I have to ask of the seminars and the teaching, and I know you're doing a lot of Skype lessons and that, but for me, you know, we met at a stick seminar 18 years ago now, and I guess you've been here at least 8 or 10 times, and you know, everywhere else, and the Freehands Academy is coming up just in a couple of weeks. What are your thoughts about? Oh, and I also had to say on my Freehands Friday interview, I mentioned that I learned to play the stick by going to seminars. So how do you feel about the importance of these seminars, not only as an instructional thing, but even as a community thing? And how do you feel about Skype lessons as something different from being in person? And well, and anything else you want to talk about that's instruction related?
Well, I think the most amazing thing about seminars is just getting a chance to see all the different ways that other people play the instrument. You know, I mean, technique is one thing, but creativity is another. And so, since there really aren't a lot of preconceptions about how the stick is supposed to be played in terms of genre, you know, like if you're going to be a blues guitarist, you got to learn all the blues guitar licks, etc. You know, with the stick, there's really not that kind of hierarchy out there to kind of direct people. So when you go to a seminar, you get to meet all these people and listen to them play, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. I never thought about doing that. I never thought about doing that. And as a community, everybody's very supportive of everybody else. You know, I learn a ton of things from when I go to seminars. You know, I go there to steal other people's licks. That's my whole point in heading out there, is I want to see what other people are doing, and I want them to ask me questions, because that's how I learn how to be a better teacher. And this whole idea of the physical movement thing came out of a question that that Randy and Matt Tate asked me at one of the Vancouver seminars. They were like, what are you doing with your hand? I was like, well, I'm putting this finger here, and putting this finger here, this finger here. And this was a long time ago. It was before I had ever really thought about physical movement. And that question opened up this whole can of worms for me about physical technique of the stick. You know, we think about digital technique, about fingers, but it's really about getting involved with the hands and the arms and the body, all that stuff together. And until, Randy, until you guys asked me that question, I had never really thought about that.
Well, you know, for me, man, I was really adamant about the 4 fingers for a long time. And it hadn't been until I started studying with you and parking the little finger and letting it just stay in bed and go to sleep, where that movement opened up everything for me. I mean, my playing within a month changed so radically. I was able to do more and more with that 3 finger, with articulating the notes, muscle memory. I mean, it just completely blew me away. I'd never go back to using 4 fingers now.
Well, I'm glad it's worked for you, Randy, and I don't want to discourage people from pursuing 4 fingers if they think like that's the thing that works great for them. But you know, it's just Emmett Emmett found it first. You know, he said in freehands, "This is a great way to play," and I took it and I ran with it, and I'm really glad I did.
Well, it has a way of embodying the whole instrument with movement. It's like the groove, everything. It's not that you can't feel that, but you tend to play more in position with 4 fingers. The 3 fingers frees you up, and when you come into a note, you can articulate it a lot easier than if you're just, you know, using the hand. Because you got the whole body there with the movement from the elbow up to the shoulder, the center line of your body. It just opens it all up for me.
Cool. Well, you know, Jim, you asked about Skype lessons, and I would say that, you know, obviously the best possible scenario is to be able to sit in a room with someone so that you can reach out and touch their hand and say, here, just try to do this, you know, a little bit, or how this feels, you know. That's obviously the best way, but to be able to teach people through Skype is amazing. I mean, I've had students in, I think, 11 different time zones so far, you know, that I've been working on it, which if anybody's out there in Guam and wants a stick lesson, you can get a stick lesson for free. You can do the first one. But Skype is amazing. The only real downside of it is that you can't really do stuff together. You know, when you're in a room with somebody else, you can play together, and, you know, but you can't play at the same time in Skype. So that's unfortunate. I'm sure somebody someday is going to get to a point where that can be done. But, you know, so far I haven't really seen that yet. But, you know, maybe that gets me to shut up and listen more to my students. So maybe that's a good thing.
No, I mean, I feel the same way doing a number of Skype lessons myself. That when you just, I like to jam with the students, and, you know, the delay with Skype is such that you just can't do that. And on occasion, just as you were doing, I will reach out and grab a finger and move it to the correct fret, and that's difficult to do on Skype. I find myself reaching toward the computer screen sometimes to try to do that. But I tend to end all of my Skype lessons with a Skype 5.
There you go.
Okay, anything else in the instructional realm, or should we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, take what you can from other instruments when you're trying to learn how to play the stick, musically especially. I think that techniques on other instruments are harder to apply to the stick, but, you know, there's other things in there that are pretty interesting. And one of them that I've been getting into a lot lately, which, you know, I've dealt with over the years, is I played this way, and I didn't really understand it all that much, was using the first finger kind of like a capo. And I know Bob has been describing this recently, but if you look at the basic song arrangement video I have posted, it talks about that aspect of using the finger to pull off for the right hand. So when I started analyzing that, I realized, you know what, I'm not really playing with the super tippy tip of my fingers very much, especially not my first finger. Most of the time, my first finger is really laying down a lot more, and it's touching the strings adjacent to it, which, you know, since I'm not playing back behind there, it doesn't really matter. Right? So when I play that note, I'm playing on my 3rd string, but I'm actually touching my 4th string. It's just not pushing it all the way down to the fret. It makes no difference. It means my hand can be much more relaxed than if I'm trying to play with my fingers arched up over the board like this, which, you know, so I just think try to let your hands relax more. The stick is very relaxed, very ergonomically friendly and comfortable instrument if you let it be that way.
That's something that I've discovered too, because I learned music on piano, and I remember, you know, piano teachers saying keep your wrists up so that your fingers are coming down vertically on the keys, and I tried to adopt that to the stick where I was literally coming straight down on the strings. And I've noticed it's not as comfortable. It looks kind of cool, but it's not that comfortable, and I've done the same thing. I'm a little bit more relaxed.
Just to give you an idea sonically, you know, of what that does for you, okay? So I'm sitting here playing this my right hand, my first finger, it's always ready to drop down to that next lowest string for those pull-offs and for those harmonies. It's so nice to have that thing there, and because I'm really comfortable. Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, when you're playing the lowest melody string, you kind of curve it over a little bit more. But as soon as I start to move away from that lowest melody string, my hand starts to lay down a little bit more, and it's just super comfortable. Same thing with the left hand. When I play this double, you know, this big power chord like this, my first finger is laying down on all the bass strings. It's just not pushing them all the way down to the frets. So go ahead, Gene, I saw that. So just go ahead and let your fingers relax. Let them lay down a little bit more.
Okay, so you're leading me into the next thing. First of all, I'm curious to know if being left-handed has any impact on the stick at all or not. And then in connection with that, let's talk about your left hand a little bit, because you do so many, well, I mean, the first thing I'm thinking of is these rhythmic bits with your left hand that are just so powerful and make such a great background for your improvisation with the other hand. So let's talk a little bit about the other hand for a bit.
Okay, now let me play a little bit of the other hand for a minute first, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. So, oops. So the thing I wanted to show you guys is just this constant motion, like the hand is not parked when the fingers are playing around the position. It's constantly moving around, always moving around, always moving around. And the energy of the hand moving is what makes the notes happen in time. So when I play this note, you can see my thumb is actually shifting, even though I'm playing only 2 frets apart. It's that movement. Always in motion, always moving, you know. That's really important. And I try not to think about what finger I'm using. I always just try to think about where is the note. But I'm going to get a finger there that I can use anyway. And I don't need to worry about that so much. But I want to just move around, move around, move around. And ghost notes, too, are a huge part of what's happening in the left hand. So if I take a tune like Cross Country, there's all kinds of ghost notes in there. Bouncing the fingers off the strings to get these ghost notes in there. It makes it very funky and percussive. The other thing I like to do is to leave my fingers on the strings. When I play a note and stop playing the note, I've got a little reverb on the sound right now, so let me just turn that off and you can see. All right. Dead stop. Okay, the damper is great, but these big fat strings are only going to cut that string so much. So if you can leave your fingers on the strings, when I play the note, I take my fingers off the fret, string off the fret, but keep the fingers on the strings. That's really important too, I think.
Just a little, I'm always curious about the process, but do you think of your left hand as, maybe you come up with an idea with the right hand and now you're trying to find an accompaniment for that, or do you set a groove with your left hand and your right hand sort of plays off of that, or is it either or?
It's any and all of the above. You know, the left hand is this multifaceted player on the board, because not only do you get to do bass lines, you also get to integrate and chords. You also get the ability to integrate those two things with each other. So it's all part of fitting those two things together. So it's almost like it has a split personality, and then you can mesh those things together, play these great big chords that are rooted in a super deep note, and the rest of the chord is way, way up above that. It's one thing I love about this, having a grand stick, is being able to play that rest of that chord way up high, really separating those two things. But it's just one hand, so it has a way of interacting with itself in a way too. So, and then the right hand, of course, can play chordally, you can play melodically, you can play interdependently with the two hands working together. I try to mix all of those things together when I'm playing any tune, try to mix up the roles of the hands and combine them.
All right. Let me shift gears again. The text has scrolled by fast enough. I don't know who asked this, but somebody was asking about, you're maybe the closest of us to Stick Enterprise as being, I guess you're technically an employee in a way, and you always know what's coming up before most of us do. So anything related to Stick Enterprises that you want to share with us, or?
The only thing I can think of to say is that this fall marks, I think, the 40th anniversary of them being in business, which I think is just amazing when you think about it. That somebody could start a business in their 30s, not even as young folks, and be in business for 40 years and build this many instruments and get them out there, and they just keep getting better. The design just keeps improving. It's not like they're just sitting back saying, well, yeah, we made the stick, and that's what we do. And, Emmett is constantly reimagining it. And so, we've got the rail board, and, probably at some point there'll be a 12-string rail board. I have no idea when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just...
Well, when I see Emmett play, obviously improvisation is his thing. And I know he's talked many times about, now that the company is here, he spends all of his time in the shop, and it's hard to find as much time to play as he would like. But it seems to me that he's improvising in the shop. And to improvise in a workman's shop is a slower process than playing an instrument. But he does come up with innovations on a fairly regular basis. And thinking about, for me, I'm not one of the originals, but my first ironwood, which I think was made in 1984, compared to an instrument that you would buy new today, there's a lot of things that have changed in 20, 25 years or so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that those are not the products of improvisation at all. I would say that those are the products of a very deliberate process on his part, which is he's always trying to find ways to make the instrument support the playing method better. So every change that he makes to the stick, every new idea that he comes up with is all about making this version of two-handed tapping, free hands, where your fingers are lined up parallel to the frets. Better, okay? So whether that means changing the design of the frets so that he can have a much lower action and a much more reliable surface than guitar frets are going to give you. You bang on your guitar frets enough times, they're going to lift up, so you got to have a fret job, okay? So we fixed that problem, first with the rods and then with the rails. You want to put an adjustable nut on the instrument so that you can change the tunings, because people were asking him to make different tunings, and he wanted to be able to set the instruments up more easily. And now we can do that too. He wants to have a straighter board, so he comes up with a way to make this very easily adjustable and accessible truss rod for that. So materials that are easier to work with. The whole thing about the rail board now is it's a design that enables a machine to do the fretwork that he used to do by hand. And you take a look at your stick. If you don't have a rail board, if you've got another one of these sticks, you take a look at your stick and you look in here at what's going on underneath these bass strings, okay? And you can see, wow, it looks like my strings are wearing the frets a lot. That's not wear. That's work that had to be done with a hand file on the frets to get that profile underneath those strings to be freer for the vibration of those low strings. That's not something you can just slap a fret in there and do. So all of these changes are changes that he's come up with that make it easier for him to build the instrument and make it easier for him to set up instruments and make the instruments play better.
This piece up here, which I'm sure you have a name for, I never truly understood what this was about until talking with Tony actually a couple of years ago, and he was saying there's a lot of things that go into Tony's bass sound, but one of them is he wants the action for the 2 or 3 lowest bass strings to be higher than everything else.
Uh-huh.
And I realized talking to him that that's the purpose of this, right? You can tilt this up so that really only a few strings are affected.
Yeah.
It just seems like it's a simple instrument, yet it's so customizable for your unique playing style.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's his goal, is to make it as universal as possible. And just look at the way that he's designed it in terms of access for the player, okay? You take the body off. What does that mean? Well, it means that you could play... You can play way up here really fast, just like you can play down here, the same thing. The same technique. You don't have to like, oh, I've got my body here, now I have to change how I'm going to deal with my right hand when I'm playing over those things. Yeah. So all the things, every aspect of the instrument is about making it easier to play and make it easier to build.
A little bit related to that, and actually something that you touched on early on, is about the role of your personal hands on the instrument. And I remember some years ago, a couple years ago on stickness, there was a thread about, does the sound come from the pickup or is it from the player's hands? And to relate a personal story, I don't know if it was the first time I met you or the second time at one of Nathan's seminars back in the 90s when I was playing the Ironwood, and I just didn't have a very good tone, and I was convinced there was something wrong with the instrument. And I vividly remember handing it over to Greg Howard at a seminar saying, yeah, could you look at this? And you played something and it sounded just like Greg Howard. And it really made me think it is the hands, you know, little things like every individual player's vibrato. I mean, that's unique to each player. But more than that, just the way that your hands interact with the instrument have so much to do with the tone that comes out. But maybe you could talk a bit about that versus the pickup and what Emmett has told me in the past, pick whichever wood you like because it doesn't matter. It's the pickup really that makes the sound in the instrument. But if you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, the pickups do have a big effect on the tone just by virtue of the fact that they're like filters. Okay, so it's like if you're a photographer, you use a filter on your lens, you're going to get a different kind of an image. The pickups are like that. But as far as how we play and how that affects the sound, I'm a huge believer in a couple of things. One of them is getting energy into the string along the line of the string. So instead of tapping down on the string like this, getting this energy in this way. I feel like that somehow puts the energy into the note in a much more precise kind of way. Maybe because we're able to put it right up against the back side of the fret where it's going to be the best sound, the fullest kind of a sound. But also because when you go this way and you hit that note, you're driving energy into the structure of the instrument. Whereas when you go this way, the energy, you can feel it. You can feel the difference in terms of how it feels. Just try it. This feels buzzy. This feels clean. There's a difference in terms of how it feels. The other thing is having your thumb underneath the hand to support the note, to my mind, makes a huge difference in the tone. If I play a note like this, and I play that same note like this, I can hear a difference in the fundamental frequency. It's very subtle, but it's there. And it's kind of like...
Is it just a hand position, or are you gripping a bit in the back there?
I'm not gripping. My thumb is very loose. Okay, it's what it is. It's the reference, the solid attack that you get. If your thumb's not there, you have to actually push down with the fingers on the board more. When you do it this way, this is supernatural. This is what our hands are designed to do, right? So doing that as opposed to doing this, where each finger has its own relationship to the thumb, very different angles and things like that. This way, I have so much more control over what's happening when my thumb is back there, the reference point. So two things, it's control and sonics. I think having the thumb back there is huge. The other thing is being able to open your hand up over the board as opposed to playing this way, what people like to call uncrossed, which is very much about digital relationship of the fingers. And you can feel what that does to your hand when you have to go like this in terms of how it closes your hand up. Your hand this way, really open. It's like what's a karate means open hand, is that right? You know, for all you people who know Japanese. But being able to get over the board like this. Beautiful, ugly music. I'm messing up my unisons today. So much more control over where you're going when your hands are open like that, to me.
Just because you mentioned the uncrossed hands, I guess one thing nice about the tuning is you end up playing the same patterns if you uncross your hands, right? I mean,
Well, it would be the same either way. I mean, I think that the nice thing about the tuning to me and having the hands open up over the board like that is that the natural shapes of the chords fit the hand. So if I'm playing this way and I've got my tuning going out from the middle in the fifths, all the chord shapes commonly occurring fit the natural shape of the hand within like 2 or 3 frets, so they're very compact. In the right hand going this way, that fits the shape of the hand perfectly. Okay, my first finger, I don't have to worry about it touching these other strings because they're being played up here. I don't have that same relationship when I play with my hand in fourths this way. So the tuning is really very ergonomically fit, and it really opens up a lot of doors, I think, in terms of what the hand can do as a unit by itself.
Okay, and in terms of tuning, just a little bit related, I don't know if this is true, but I sort of think that you invented the baritone tuning on the 10 string, and I've seen you play match reciprocal, and I guess you're playing classic right now. Any thoughts about tunings or why you use a particular tuning, or does it matter? Is it just trying to not get your hands to run into each other?
Well, it has to do with the sound, basically, and I started out on an old ironwood like you, and after just a few weeks, I broke the first string on the instrument, and I didn't have a string that would fit that length all the way down to the nut, and so I was not that crazy about the sound of the classic tuning at that point. I found that I wanted to go lower. I wanted to have more overlap, so I just decided, hey, I'll take those 4 strings and move them over and add a 4th inside. And I actually had to tie a string onto another string, that's something Russell mentioned the other day, so that it would make it down to the tuning machine, because I couldn't find a guitar string that was long enough to do that. But I loved it right away. It was like, wow, this is awesome. And a couple of things I really like about the tuning. First off, it overlaps into the left hand a lot more.
You're talking about classic?
Baritone melody.
Oh, like the low notes, don't you, in the right hand?
Yeah, I mean, this way down here. Okay, so this is C, B, A, G, F. There's my guitar low E, right? If I'm in classic tune, I don't even have that note on the instrument anywhere on the right hand. So it gets you down into that rhythm guitar range more. The other thing I really love about the baritone melody tuning as a keyboard player is this is C and this is C. They straddle the inlay markers, so they're very easy to find, which I really like when I'm trying to learn a piece. I can completely see where the piece is on the board right away because I've got that reference point right there. That when we read stick music, that's our middle C, like guitar, even though it's an octave below the actual middle C on a piano. And then classic tuning, of course, gives you the highest melody note you have on the longer scale, that high D. You can't go up any higher than that, so I like having that range. But the coolest thing about the classic tuning is this. D on my 12th fret inlay marker. D on my 12th fret inlay marker. I mean my 2nd fret inlay marker on the bass side. That pattern is the same across. I know that D, E, B, sorry, God, I can't even say it. D, A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp. Okay? Here, D, A, E, B, F sharp, but no
High
C
bass
sharp
fourth?
there because I have a high bass 4th, which I love because it gives me these
The power chord?
gives me the power chords. It gives me the sharp 9 with one hand, and then the 13. That's so beautiful. That high bass 4th. And it also means you can take all of those chords we know, the root 5, 10 chords that we play on the melody side, this kind of chord. You just take the note that's on string number 10, move it up to string number 12. You've got a more open voicing of that chord. So, and then you've got that triple stop. Okay.
All right.
So it's a nice tuning. You know, everybody has different reasons for other tunings. I also have an instrument in the dual bass reciprocal tuning, which I really love because it's like Jocko on the right hand. You know, you get to really fly around. And I've got that instrument here. If you guys want to hear it, I'd be happy to put it on and play a little bit. Anybody interested?
Maybe toward the end we could do that, if that's all right.
Okay, I thought we were getting towards the end.
Well, yeah, we are. But I'm just trying to get Russell in because Russell's got a question for you, so I'm going to pass it over to him for a minute, which I believe is related to the teaching side of things.
Okay.
Right. Hey, Greg. Our community is still relatively small, certainly compared to the guitar community. And people are really hungry for knowledge, too. So they're looking for instructors. And also, it seems like when people achieve a certain level of proficiency, they start teaching. And we all know that a good player doesn't necessarily make a good teacher and vice versa. Do you have any thoughts on that, on how many people are instructing? What should people look for in going with the teacher and an instructor? Or anything along those lines?
Well, everybody should study with me, for starters. And no, seriously, the thing you should look for in a teacher is, I think, you should look for somebody whose music moves you, first off, okay? Because obviously you're going to want to try to tap into wherever that's coming from. As a teacher, I think you have a responsibility to have some kind of a system in terms of what you're teaching so that it makes sense, so that you can say, this is why I do this. And if you can't do that, if you're just saying, well, here's how you play this chord, here's how you play this chord, if you can't really explain what goes into that, then I think that you need to prepare yourself more for teaching. I think especially if you're going to charge money for teaching lessons, you got to have some ideas about how to teach what it is you're teaching, rather than just saying, here's how I do this, here's how I do this. You gotta say why. What is it that drives that? What is it that's going to make that happen? Why do I use that three-finger technique? Why do I use that hand movement? What's going on there? What's the benefit of it? I think that you got to be able to explain that to people. And I teach. I don't charge very much for my lessons. I try to keep the price very low because I want to encourage people to take as many lessons as they possibly can. To me, that's really. I learn more from teaching someone on a regular basis than I'm going to learn from teaching them, once a month or once every 2 months or whatever. I have some students who take 2 or 3 lessons a week, and that's just like yes, because we can really get a serious conversation going on that's going to develop and develop and develop. So,
well, I'd just pick up with the first thing you said jokingly, only I would say it not jokingly. I mean, I teach and I want everybody to take lessons from me, but I would say everyone should take a Skype lesson from Greg Howard, because if you have your regular students that you can do a lot of stuff with, but I've seen you at seminars. If somebody's got a local teacher and they just want to take, I'm telling a couple of my students to try to take a lesson to you because of the physical side of things. And I'm thinking a lot of what's in the DVD, the basic free hands technique, that everybody can gain so much from just you getting their hands in the right place or making sure the instrument is put on properly and just that, the physical arm position and hand motion.
Thanks.
I just think you're the master.
Thanks, Jim. That DVD is just, it's purely one concept, really. I mean, that's all there is in there, is that concept of hand motion and how it informs playing the stick. And so, I agree with you. I think that getting that and looking through that it's a great foundation just for starting. So I would really encourage people to do that. It costs less than a 1-hour Skype lesson does. So, just invest in a little bit of material and take a look at it. And the other thing I like about it is that it works with every common stick tuning. So if you're playing classic, baritone melody, match reciprocal, all of that, you can use the DVD. Everything on it, you can play with it. So.
And I do have to say another thing. The farther I get into my career as a stick player, the more I appreciate what you've done for me in the past. And one of them was at the seminar this year. I'm more and more confident about teaching to a group of people. But and Dale Lattiser and I were laughing really hard about this because you get all ready to do a lesson and everything's ready and maybe you got stuff up on the whiteboard and then you turn to the room and here's Scott's playing 7+5 and here's a match reciprocal and then Dennis came up a couple of years ago with the dual bass reciprocal and then here's an SG12 with dual guitar tuning and just the sheer number of different tunings you can have on the instrument is a little overwhelming for an instructor because I'm making the adjustment now, but boy, in the beginning it's like, oh man, I don't know where your fingers should go. If you got my instrument, it should be here, but
Well, the thing is though that in all of those cases, okay, there's elements of basic technique that come from the stick that apply, and so it doesn't matter what your tuning is. stick playing is really the same phenomenon, right? I see Greg nodding his head like, yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm just looking over here on the right.
So
Is
I'd
there
like
anything
to add
else that you
something.
wanted to
If
chat
I could,
about?
Jim, let me just jump in
Oh,
on
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
Sorry, let me just jump in on that. There's so many ways to, and actually I want to kind of just go back to talking about lessons and foundations and ways to be successful. To get an early victory with an instrument as new as the Chapman stick, I've seen a lot of times, people will develop their own styles, and that's good. But if you start with, like, just say like 1/100th of what you spent for the instrument on lessons, or 1/50th, if you just say, hey, over the next year, I'm going to spend $200, I'm going to spend $300, I'm going to spend $500, whatever it is, on lessons, you can really accelerate what it is that you're trying to do. If you have visualized what you're looking to do, and having a lesson, going to a seminar, those are all big pluses, but nothing beats one-on-one instruction. And I see that, there's a lot of guys out there offering it. Greg's been doing seminars a long time. Jim, you've been doing it a long time too. And I've kind of debated it with teachers as well. It's just like, just take a fraction of what you pay for your instrument. Set that aside, right? You're making a house. What's the first thing you build? The foundation. Take a couple lessons. Like, set yourself up for success. It makes good sense. Everyone should do a Skype lesson like once a month. Just everyone should, right? Bob should. Emmett should. Everyone should take a lesson just to, like, get outside of your skin to, like, learn more about what it is that you do. And so I think that, I think lessons are important. That's what I wanted to share.
Right on, Jim.
And Greg, you do it well. So.
Well, thanks, man. Well, it's a learning experience for me, and I have a lot of fun. And it's I learn a lot about music too. And my students bring me pieces of music they want to learn that I've never heard before, and I'm like, wow, that's an amazing piece of music. I would love to check that out. And I learn how to play it and learn how to teach it to them, and so my horizons expand as well. So, yeah, and I have a lot of time doing it, and I don't necessarily have to bathe first, so Skype is good. I can just come out here in my jammies and teach a lesson, and it's no problem.
Well, I know Gene's sort of wanting to wind down here pretty soon, but the last thing I wanted to throw out for you, Greg, is what's coming up. And maybe this would have been a better question last year because Azul is such a big project. But what's in the next 6 to 12 months for Greg Howard?
Okay, well, first off, I'm deep into the classic tuning version of the songbook, which, it's been a long time coming. Because of the difference in the lower placement of the notes on the baritone melody version, I had to kind of reinterpret some of the things, change a melody note here or there. It just takes a while to translate that. So the classic tuning version of the songbook, I'm deep into that. I've got people who have volunteered to proofread a chart here or there who have classic tuning, and that's been really helpful. So if anybody wants, especially if you have the older version of the songbook, the baritone melody, and you're interested in proofing a classic tuning version, if you have a classic instrument, let me know. I'd love to be able to throw that your way. And because proofing it is hard, it's a lot of data points, and there's mistakes in the books, and I don't want to have that happen. I want it to be as good as it can be. And then I'm playing a lot with this African or world music band with 2 African percussionists and a saxophone player. And that's a lot of fun, and been using the dual bass reciprocal instrument a little bit for that. So I'm going to put that on and go out with that. Other things that I'm working on, starting to get back into composing a little bit more, and really interested in trying to make another kind of a solo record, but this one more, I guess, a little less tune-oriented in the way that Stick Figures is, and maybe get into some textures and improvisational ideas a little bit more. And continue to work on instructional videos, and also the Stickbook Volume 2, which is basically a collection of drilling exercises. Each one starts with a basic concept, and then develops that concept through varying degrees of progressions of difficulty, so that you can really start with a basic idea and expand your skill from a simple idea out into all these different permutations. So.
I really like the way that you laid out the songbook in giving people exercises related to the melodies of the songs to work on before they actually address the song. I just love that. Brilliant. This is the DVR?
Yes, it is. I'm going to adjust my preamp a little bit for the sound. So in this instrument, the melody side is substituted for a bass tuning. So I have a common low B on both sets of strings, fifths here. So that's just like a regular stick tuning, okay, fifths bass. And then on the melody side, it continues on from that low B. So the next note is a low E, right? Like you would have on a 4-string bass. So this is.
So it's like a 7-string fourth space and a 6-string.
Exactly, exactly. So when I'm playing on the melody strings, that low B string is common to both groups of strings. And the reason why I like this, I like it on the 10th string pretty well, but I really like it on the 12th string because it makes it possible for me to play. Sorry, it's a little slightly bit out of tune. My apologies. Just down there in that bass range, it's so fun to play bass lines with your right hand, because you know how to play all that melodic stuff by learning in fourths, and just take that and turn it into the bass player. Then you've got this area, for chords, it's kind of limited. You can go up here.
Okay, and just real quick, there's some chatter on the side here to maybe explain that tuning a little bit better. So you have the low bass
low
string.
B string is at string number 7. Okay, so it's like the classic bass tuning down a half step.
So the left hand is nothing new about that. It's just that the right hand now, the lowest melody string is a fourth up from the lowest bass string.
Right. So it's
and
an
then
E.
a fourth and a fourth.
That's 5-string bass low B, and then 4-string bass low E.
Yeah. And those are a fourth apart. So it really is the 7 bass in chords, starting from the low bass string through the melody string. 5, 6 string
Exactly.
bass.
Exactly. So you can play some pretty interesting bass parts. These are doubled. These two strings are doubled.
I've never played that tuning, but how thick, do you know what the gauge of the lowest, what you call melody string is? Because it's really a bass string, right?
It's like a 105, I think.
So that's pretty good.
And it matches up the tuning on this. The string gauge is a little bit lighter than it normally would be because when you're playing up here, You don't want that to be too fat. Otherwise, it'll be too clunky when you get way up here. But you can play this tuning. Pretty high up, even though you're playing on bass strings. So that's a lot of fun. And the main thing is you got to have a pickup that'll support it. The regular stick up doesn't work very well for it because it only has one full piece on the lowest melody string.
And that's the passive 4 you got there?
Passive 4, yeah. The active 2 works nicely with it, and the railboard would work nicely on it too. So.
Well, Greg, this has been awesome. I mean, I know there's so many Greg Howard fans out there in the stick world, so thanks for your time and your insight. And if there's nothing else, I think I might throw you back to Gene and let him wrap things up. But great to see you again, and thanks so much for everything.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate it. And great to see you, too.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I had a comment. Yeah, so my comment was this. Jim, you've known Greg a long time, and you guys met at a seminar. Was that up in Canada?
That was Nathan. You know, Nathan Aswell did a couple of seminars in the '90s. It was I think '96 and '97. So yeah, it was '96.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 96.
Okay, I was kind of curious.
And I met Nathan at a seminar before that down in Fullerton, California. That was the first one I did in '96, and that was with Bob. So, and then I met Jim Riley, who also did seminars up in Canada, and who you guys know from a previous Freehands Friday. I met him at the seminar in Vancouver. And then I met, who else did I? Like people come to seminars and then they start putting on seminars, and it's like this 6 degrees of separation from Jim Meyer. He's gone almost as many seminars as I have, I think.
Well, it is an institution amongst the seminars, and also what Glenn's doing, and I'm hoping to get Glenn on here as well, because certainly we look to guys like you to kind of do that regularly, so that we know where to go when we want to learn more about the instrument and meet other cats. So, anyways,
Cool.
Greg and
Jim, Greg?
Well, I have a couple announcements. Couple announcements. And then, but I do want to hear Greg Howard play. Thanks to Jim and Greg, obviously, for making this happen, and to Greg and to Michael and to Russell for kind of basically doing all the coordination for this. Russell made this all happen and got everyone together, and I was just kind of along to do the blah blah blah. So thank you, Russell. Some quick announcements. Next week we'll have Gary Jabilian on. So NS Players Rejoice. Gary, the man who works at Stick Enterprises, will be joining us next week. And he'll talk a little bit about what he does, about his work at Stick Enterprises, how he came to the instrument and that sort of thing. And so that date kind of got moved around a little bit, but I'm excited to know that we'll get a sit down. And actually, I haven't found somebody to be a host yet. It might be Dawn. Maybe we can get Nathan to come on or something like that. That'd be cool. And then let's see what else. Freehands Academy is in less than 2 weeks, so that's pretty super gnarly exciting for me. The 15th, which is a week after we have Gary on the show, we'll probably do something live from Bel Air, California, which will feature Greg, no doubt, and then a couple of people on the call. Michael will be there. And speaking of Michael, there'll be lapdogs available at the Freehands Academy if somebody wants to pick one of those up. So there you go. Yeah, they come in that awesome black now, so those are pretty cool. Yep. And then I suppose the Freehands Friday, the live Freehands Friday. I don't know what it's going to be. I think it's going to be kind of silly, kind of crazy. Like we might just pass around a camera and just kind of show everyone all the fun we're having there. But you can be sure that Greg and Bob and Steve and Dale and Dawn and Kevin and Emmett and Gary and me, and I'm leaving somebody else out. I can't remember who. But they'll all be there, and so it'll be lots of fun. And then after that, we'll probably do maybe a wrap-up or even two with things that have gone on. We'll feature the State of the Stick discussion that we'll have this year, which will also feature Tony Levin. And I think that's all the announcements that I have. Russell, did I miss anything? Or no? Okay.
That's it.
Then thanks again, everyone, for being here. Happy Freehands Friday. Have a great Freehands Friday. And Greg, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Gene.